What I've learned in the last couple of years is you can absolutely teach courage. You can develop it in yourself and you can develop it in others. And it basically boils down to 4 skill sets: vulnerability, clarity of values, trust, and what I call rising skills, the ability to get back up when we fall, when we experience setbacks and failures. It's interesting because I didn't think rising skills or resilience was going to be on this list, but as it turns out, the most courageous men and women I've interviewed over the past 15 years talk about their courage only being possible because they know how to get back up when they inevitably fall. And one of the things that's true is that if you're brave enough often enough, you will fall. It's not a question if you might fall, you will, by definition, if you're brave in your classrooms, in your life, with your partners, with your kids, with the people you care about. If you're brave, you're gonna get hurt. I mean, the brokenhearted are the bravest among us because they have the courage to love, right? And so we have to learn how to get back up. Let's start with vulnerability, and let's start with the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to really show up and let people in. How many of you were raised to believe that vulnerability is weakness? Most of us. Here's what I can tell you, and I'll challenge you. Yell up if you can think of something. I cannot find in 200,000 pieces of data a single example of courage that was not completely defined by vulnerability. Let me challenge you. Can you think of one courageous thing that you have seen someone do in your life that did not require vulnerability, that did not require uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? One thing. I find zero evidence. And let me tell you, I've stood in front of a group like this of special force military people. They can't think of a single example of courage that did not require absolute vulnerability. But we hate vulnerability because it opens us up to being hurt. And we think, I don't want to be vulnerable because vulnerability is the center of shame and scarcity and fear and anxiety and grief and disappointment. So I am going to armor up and self-protect. I'm not going to let people hurt me, see me, take advantage of me. The problem is that when we armor up like that, not only is vulnerability certainly the center of these experiences, it's also the center of these: love and belonging and joy. No vulnerability, no love, no belonging, no joy. What do you think is the most vulnerable human affect we experience? What's the hardest emotion for us to handle as humans? Joy. How many of you are parents? How many of you have ever stood over your child while they're sleeping and thought, oh my God, I love you like so much I can't breathe? And then in that split second, pictured something horrific happening to your child. What was the one variable men and women who had the capacity to lean heavily into joy? What was the one variable they shared in common? This should be a pedagogy of itself. What is the one variable that people who can really lean into joy share in common? It is part of vulnerability, but it's actually a practice. Gratitude. The only variable that really separates men and women who cannot lean into joy, who start dress rehearsing tragedy. And the reason we dress rehearse tragedy is so we can beat vulnerability to the punch. So what we do is like, oh, this great thing's happening. I'm gonna start picturing worst case scenario so that when I get hurt and it happens, I'm all prepared for it, right? But how many of you think we can actually prepare for that? You cannot. 50% of the people in this room have probably experienced the thing that we dress rehearse, and they could come up here one at a time and tell you, you can practice that all you want. That will do nothing to help you when that moment comes. The only thing you're doing is squandering the joy that you need that builds a reservoir for when hard things happen. So as it turns out, our bodies really neurobiologically experience joy as vulnerability and threat, and we quiver. And so some of us use the quiver as a warning sign to start thinking about terrible things, and others use that quiver as a reminder to be grateful, to stop on the sidewalk in that moment and say, I'm really grateful for this date night. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our time together. But that's harder, right? Than to go, have you ever pictured someone? So love, belonging, and joy, absolute vulnerability. But also these things: courage, empathy, trust, innovation, and creativity. No vulnerability, no innovation, no creativity.
One of my goals as a human being has been to evolve to the point of being a student in the spiritual realm, enough that I could be able to bestow some of my knowledge, the information I've gathered over the years from thousands of interviews in such a way that I could call myself a teacher. And I dared not call myself a teacher until hearing it from you. And because you have said, I'm a teacher, and you are here. It's been an amazing day here with you all. First of all, I have one of my South African daughters. I have 20 girls in college in the United States, and one of them, Shade, is here at Stanford. And I remember landing on the campus with her, and we didn't know if she was going to get in yet. And she, as we got into the car and we were pulling away, she said, "Mama, these are my people." And I can understand why. Just being here in the presence of such energetic, stimulated brilliance makes us all want to be better. So I wish I could have gone to this school, and I'm thrilled that I have one of my daughters who does go to this school. I love everything that happens here in the bubble. Really excited to be a part of the Harry Rothburn lecture series, because I have spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours talking to spiritual leaders and teachers, and not just spiritual leaders and teachers who have been deemed so, but thousands of people who came from levels of dysfunction, who came from levels of pain, who were suffering, who were challenged in their progression of trying to be the best human beings they could be. And they allowed themselves the opportunity to come on our show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, and share their stories. I am one who believes in the sharing of stories. I believe in the process of sharing, period, because I know that all life gets better when you share it. And those thousands of people who have been guests on the show, and many of them who are also audience members, have been my greatest teachers. And I would say that one of my gifts, and it's everybody's job to know what your gift is. So when I talk about my gift, I'm not bragging, it's just fact. One of my gifts that I've had since I was a little girl growing up in Mississippi, being raised on a tiny little acre farm with my grandmother, is that I knew how to pay attention. I was a great observer of life. And I grew up believing that I was indeed, for sure, God's child. It's because every Sunday I sat in our little church down the road, a dirt road from where my grandmother lived, no running water, no electricity. I was saying this to my great niece who's 8 the other day, and she said, "It sounds like Little House on the Prairie." And I go, it kind of was. No running water, no electricity, but the church is down the road from us. And we could hear the singing as I was getting dressed for Sunday school. And I'd always sit on the left-hand side, the left pew in the second row. And I would listen to the preacher preach about the Lord thy God is a loving God. And sometimes he would say the Lord thy God is a jealous God. Most important, I heard him say, you are God's child, and through God, all things are possible. And I literally took him at his word, so that by the time I was leaving, had to leave my grandmother because she became ill, and I was sent to live in Milwaukee with my mother, who had 2 other children. I got beat up on the playground because when people would ask me, who is your daddy? I would say, Jesus is my daddy. Sometimes he's my brother, and God is my father. But what I now know and have learned, that my view of God, although I call that God in a box and all that, although that has, my vision of God has expanded to be inclusive of all things. God is all, God is law, God is all, in all things. Not just the guy sitting up with the beard. And now that that view of God has expanded, I still understand how important it was for a little colored girl. We weren't even black yet, not to mention African American. You know what I mean, Harry? A little colored girl in Mississippi for whom there was no vision of hope or possibility. My grandmother's greatest desire for me, as she had been a maid and her mother before her had been, a maid. Her greatest desire was that I would grow up one day and be able to do the same. And she wished for me that I would be able to, as she used to say, I hope you get some good white folks when you grow up. But I now know that having that belief system, that something greater than me was in charge of my destiny, of my fate, that it wasn't just me alone having to survive for myself, is the thing, is the value, is the rock that has sustained me. So my vision, my perception, my understanding of what it means to be a universal citizen has grown as I came to understand Acts 17:28, my favorite Bible verse that says, in God I move and breathe and have my being. So my every attempt in life has been, since I was a little girl, to be in that space that I call God, to literally live in the breath that is God, to live in the breath and allow the breath to breathe me as God. And that is the reason I see I have been able to manage fame, handle the success, grow in grace, grow in the wisdom and glory that is offered by that space that I know to be God. Because in God, I live and breathe, I move and breathe, and I have my being. And everything that I do and all that I am comes up and out from the center of that space, even when I didn't know what to call it. So I have paid attention to my life because I understand that my life, just like your life, is always speaking to you, where you are, in the language, with the people, with the circumstances and experiences that you can understand and interpret if you are willing to see that always life, God, is speaking to you. The point of the story is God can dream, the universe can dream, your creation can dream, the flow of your life can dream, has a bigger plan and a bigger dream for you than you can ever even imagine for yourself. When I finished The Color Purple, Quincy Jones said to me, baby, your future is so bright it burns my eyes. And I say the same thing to all of you Stanford students, with this amazing gift to be at this institution and let your light so shine, your brilliance. Your future's so bright, it burns my eyes. The glory that the universe, God has in store for you is unimaginable to you if you will surrender that which is yourself in alignment with the greater self and allow yourself to become a part of the force of all. Take your glory. It's waiting for you, and run with it. Thank you.